Hey everybody, can you hear me fine? I'm Mark Smargon from Fuse, and I'll talk a bit about Web3 and how we see this fits into what we're doing, but also how we see this changing traditional finance, so to speak. But first, let me give you a little bit of background about me. So the company started 3 years ago, Fuse, the Fuse network. Before Fuse, I was founding a company that was doing colored coins back in 2013. So about a decade in the crypto space. And before that, 20 years ago, did like a e-commerce platform in Israel. We're based in Israel, by the way. So the company is basically, like the DNA of the company is SMBs. It's really the long tail of businesses, the long tail of merchants. And this is what we've been doing for the last 20-something years. But in the last 10 years, full-time crypto. And Fuse is like the next iteration of what we're doing. So first of all, why we started Fuse? Because we really think that there's a high entry barrier for any company that wants to compete in the digital space on user experience, integration of money, creating good experience with money, especially on mobile, is not something that is accessible to regular businesses. This is really a game that only the big companies can compete, like Uber or banks or Google. So really, one of the things that we realized in the last few years, but most importantly in the last, let's say, 6 months to a year, is really that sharing economy business models don't work. So those big companies, you know, they come into a market, they have a lot of funding, and they basically pay money for users to use their products. So this is how Uber is getting, you know, users. And this is also a very high entry barrier for other companies to compete. Let's say I want to compete with Uber. I really need like a few billions of dollars. In the past, it was also another entry barrier, which was like actually developing the app, developing the user experience. That was a high entry barrier. So today what we want to do is we want to give access to this capability to every company. Because those models don't work. Uber business model is not something that the investors enjoy, right, recently with the downturn in the market. But it's definitely not something the merchants enjoy. Because they're taking something like 30% fee. And I'm not talking only about Uber, I'm talking about pretty much every company in the sharing economy has the same exact business model, 30% fee, whether it's WeWork, Uber, Grubhub, something around 20 to 30%. If you're looking at the App Store, Apple Store, or the Google Play Store, 30% fee. So really the sharing economy is not really sharing any wealth with anybody. There's like really one rent taker. And if we look at deeper into those business models, we see that the merchants are not making money and the delivery people also don't make money. So, you know, you don't really want to work for a bot for a living. So there's a lot of broken models in the space. I also already talked about my background. So what we see is that also legacy financial infrastructure is not something that we can really see people accessing. There's a lot of people that don't need a bank today. So in the past, people were talking about underbanked or unbanked. Today, there's actually more and more, especially in the West, more people that actually use non-banks to conduct financially. This is something that's still happening and still growing. So this whole push for, you know, giving banking solutions for underbanked or unbanked, it's not really working. You know, there's more and more people that choose to work with non-banks, with neobanks, so to speak. Also, 50% of POS transactions, at least in Europe, are still made in cash. So we see a big rip in the traditional, more traditional markets. A big rip in cash, especially although there was Corona and it was like a little bit of a change, but still a lot of people are comfortable using cash. And actually the biggest companies, the biggest users of cash is also countries that have Visa. Every country that doesn't have Visa, they already, you know, bypassed cash entirely. Like they're already doing only mobile phone transactions. So we're kind of in a transition period where banking is changing rapidly. Suddenly cash is disappearing. It's happening worldwide. It's happening at the same time. It's pushed by really strong consumer demand. There was consumer demand for services like Uber until we now find out it's not really sustainable business models. And there's also a push to move off banks, move to like a new models. And this is where Web3 comes in. So Web3 is, in my opinion, really a tool for finding new business models. And I will elaborate about this because people talk about Web3 and it kind of means a lot of things for different people. Depending on who you speak to, you'll hear a different definition. So my definition is a little bit broad, but it's really after the several decades of iteration of web technology, we can really add ownership to the mix. Which was something that was really hard to do in the past. So in the past, you know, Facebook owned everything, Google owned everything, Apple owned everything. So really the internet of today, the way we know it, was built by internet companies, by corporations. And this is really what characterized the last, let's say, 2-3 decades. If you remember, the first version of the internet was on AT&T. It was completely closed, completely centralized, completely owned by AT&T, every piece of it. So there's definitely a lot of evolution since then. And Web3, what it adds is really a way for us to give ownership to a user, give ownership to a company, not necessarily, or divide certain aspects. Like, for instance, the issuer can be different than the custodian. In the past, it was impossible. So there's really a solution to provide a trust between entities that are not necessarily trust each other. So that's really how Web3 is evolving the internet. And if you add the ownership to the mix, it's actually adding a lot of interesting properties. So the fact that it's all open source, the fact that you can use this infrastructure without necessarily pay, you know, royalties or by licensing. It's a bit like HTTP or TCP/IP. It's basically another layer of the internet that enables companies to find new business models, really outside of the big platforms. So if we look at a little bit of traditional, you know, models of Web2, and Web2 definitely brought a lot of new business models, you know, SaaS and cloud, and we have a lot of interesting stuff, like sharing economy was something that Web2 kind of enabled. I don't see how you could create something like Uber before there were like all this infrastructure in mobile phones and GPSs and everything was kind of talking together. So that enabled, Web2 enabled the business models that we see now, like Uber. It enabled software as a service, which is currently dominating the B2B sphere. Like it's practically the way software, the way to make money with software right now is basically mostly SaaS. Doing subscriptions, those are very clear Web2 business models. So Web3, what it enables is new business models that are kind of like outside the platforms. So ICO is not necessarily a business model, but it's definitely enabling funding. It's also changing the capital formation for funding those projects. Like if you think about Web2, it was mostly created by capital formation from the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley. Those are the people that funded it. There's almost no European Web2 companies or even Asian, like big ones outside of maybe China, I don't know. But most of the Web2 infrastructure was really created and funded by a very small amount of people. So definitely ICOs, at least at the beginning, were kind of like a Wild West, but they didn't disappear, you know, they still get funded. They just call it differently, IEO, IDO. There's still a very, very powerful way to basically access capital from any person in the world. That's pretty game-changing. And then starting to do stuff when you remove Visa from the equation, like revenue sharing, like giving people percentages. It's impossible to have any other partner other than Apple. When you need to share 30% of your revenue with Apple, you don't really have room for any other partners, right? So Web3 allows us to really see business models that just couldn't exist when it was all dominated by like really 10 companies. And this is really the interesting part. We think that, there's a convergence of trends. This is exactly the perfect storm that gave birth to the Bitcoin technology. It was the right timing. It was the right emotions. There was a lot of trends that converged. It's not only the Bitcoin part, it's also the open source part. It's also the financial crisis of 2009, 2008. We're talking about the perfect storm all over again. So after how much, 14, 15 years of bull market, we now see finally that Google and Facebook and Amazon and all those companies can't grow forever. The market kind of like reached the peak of their potential. They can't just buy every company in existence. They can't build all the infrastructure and monetize it by themselves. So that's one trend that is definitely clear. Another trend that is definitely clear is really the fact that it's no longer that difficult to compete with Uber. And Uber understands that. It's really starting to get like lower and lower entry barrier, where more and more partners, more and more local firms, more and more startups are able to compete, are able to offer something competitive. Especially when it's local, it's usually more competitive. It's usually cheaper, not in every use case, but definitely harder to manage all the cab drivers in the world through one company. It's much easier to make it decentralized. There is value to decentralization. And I think people start to realize this now. So Web3 is really the convergence of all those trends, the open source, the recession, the crypto revolution, so to speak, and really those ideas that we could have an alternative to the App Store. We could have an alternative to Airbnb. It's no longer mandatory for us to conduct ourselves in platforms. We can actually move our ownership, our identity, our data between platforms, not necessarily asking Facebook for permission to share private data, or not even giving Facebook any private data. So that's really the perfect storm for crypto, where even Facebook understands that there's a problem here. Really the main thing is enabling competition, is creating technology against monopoly, and the fact that it's happening in a rapid. The people don't understand it, but it's like exponentially faster. If you look 10 years ago, how the crypto space started, it was very slow. In a perspective of 10 years, we're moving at light speed. So those conferences, we can expect to grow, and we can expect those companies to proliferate. It's actually kind of like exciting right now. So Fuse is a payment blockchain. We're really seeing that blockchains of the future are not going to be consumer-facing. We believe that the addressable market for, let's say, crypto users is about 30 million users. When we have billion users in the space, nothing's going to look the same. So right now we're seeing out of those 30 million users that crypto has, a very small amount know what they're doing, and the rest are following them. It's mostly technical people or investors. But in the future, people will not interact with blockchains directly, but through companies, through businesses. So we want to build the most business and consumer-friendly blockchain. And we want to replace Visa, because we don't think that every business needs Visa as a partner, or Uber as a partner, or Apple as a partner. And if somebody wants to build their own, competitor to Uber, they can do it. We have a project, for instance, that is doing food delivery in Liverpool. We have a project that's doing events in Bangkok. Finance can be worldwide. It doesn't have to be local. You don't have to be an American company to sell to Americans anymore. So the world is changing, and I don't think that Visa can keep up. So Fuse is really a blockchain to replace Visa. Really the way that the payments will work going to be radically different. So Fuse tries to achieve it through vertical integration to create a good user experience and hide all the complexity behind the scenes for the user, makes the technology transparent, makes payment really something that is more like, feels like Web 2, but it's still decentralized, it's still non-custodial, it's still run on open source tech, because open source tech can also be comfortable. It doesn't have to be a lot of friction using crypto. So that's really what the Fuse blockchain tries to validate. And you can visit our booth and hear more details, and we can tell you all about how to build on Fuse. Thank you.